Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power alongside Michael Shepard. I'm Tyler Kendall.
Tonight, the pressure campaign on the Fed reaches a new level, with the DOJ today signaling plans to potentially investigate Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook following allegations of wrongdoing, as a top official encourages her removal. The latest from the White House up ahead.
Plus, the president now defending his decision to send National Guard into Washington, D.C., suggesting he may even join troops in their patrolling of the district as early as this evening. We'll discuss that story and more when former Vice President Mike Pence joins us here in just moments.
Also tonight, Texas is now one step closer to redrawing its congressional maps, setting off a redistricting standoff with blue states like California as next year's midterms take shape in real time.
We're live from Jackson Hole, one day before Jerome Powell takes the stage at the annual Economic Symposium. We preview what to expect and have live reaction to the developing news around Fed Governor Lisa Cook when Chicago Fed President Austan Goolsbee joins us up ahead.
But we begin tonight with new developments in the pressure campaign on the Fed. More specifically, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The Department of Justice now potentially investigating Cook following accusations of mortgage fraud. A DOJ official signaling earlier today that Jerome Powell should fire Cook, despite the Fed governor denying any wrongdoing and putting out a statement saying that she will remain in office. Federal Housing and Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte spoke to Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick a short time ago. Here was his reaction when pressed on the White House's role in the Cook investigation.
At the same time, Bill, we also have raised concern about whether this might be a weaponization of your office, a weaponization of the White House. And I am curious if there has been direct, guidance from the White House to pursue this?
We discovered this within the confines of our charter that Congress has given us. We continue to receive tips within the confines that Congress has given us. As I said, people can go and email us. They can send us tips. We encourage that to happen. And that's how this was sourced.
Joining us now with the latest from the administration is Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, who joins us live from the White House North Lawn. Kate, thank you for joining us. Kate, give us a sense of the latest. We are also hearing from Bill Pulte that this is part of a widening angle on this question of mortgage fraud.
That's right. So I think what we're seeing is, this is part of a broader pressure campaign. So the DOJ, as you mentioned, today signaled that it was going to start an investigation into Lisa Cook and is also urging Jerome Powell to remove her from the Board of Governors. But importantly, Powell does not actually have the legal authority to do that. The only person who does have that authority is the president. And even if that were to happen, there had to be cause. Trump has been has discussed the possibility of firing Cook, as we've reported, but as of right now, that is not his preference. He would like to see her resign instead. This is all over allegations that Cook falsified bank records and property documents in order to get a more favorable loan, so committing mortgage fraud. And Cook, for her part, says, she's not going to be bullied into stepping down and intends to stay at the central bank.
And Kate, another story that we're tracking here in Washington is that President Trump says that he may join police and military here in the district. What should we be watching out for later tonight as this unfolds?
That's right. So Trump called into a radio show earlier today and said that he wanted to join police officers, members of the military, as part of a patrol the D.C. streets tonight. So we actually just a few minutes ago got a few more details on this. Right now the plan is for the president to motorcade to a law enforcement staging point in the city and then address agents who are part of this D.C. operation. I think the outing is clearly trying to highlight Trump's efforts, his quite stunning federal takeover of the D.C. police and the deployment of the National Guard to D.C. And really as he makes a very aggressive and big show to crack down on crime in D.C.
All right, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, we thank you as always for your reporting. Joining us now for a reaction to that and much more, I'm pleased to say, is the former Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. Vice President Pence, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you both for having me on.
I want to start with one of these top stories that we're following today, which has to do with the pressure campaign from the White House when it comes to the Federal Reserve. And now you told Bloomberg Television last month that the president ought to be able to express himself when it comes to the Fed. But I want to get your thoughts on these latest allegations against Fed Governor Lisa Cook. What's your level of concern now, if at all, when it comes to central bank independence as we see the scrutiny widen?
Well, certainly I think it'd be appropriate for Lisa Cook to respond to the allegations that have been made. I know the president's called on her to resign, but she has a right to defend herself. I did read today that Federal Home Loan has found more than 22,000 Americans that have filed mortgages, claims, and 2 residences at the same time. And so I think she should answer for that, have a chance to answer for it. But what I hope is that the effort to push out another member of the Federal Reserve isn't just simply part and parcel of an effort to get Jerome Powell, who our administration appointed as Federal Reserve Chair, to lower interest rates or otherwise take action that would not otherwise be justified. I understand the president's frustration with Chairman Powell, and he's entitled to speak out about that. But my hope is that these latest allegations are not simply part of that overall pressure campaign and can be given and afforded the due process that they deserve.
Mr. Vice President, we'd like to turn to another topic we've been covering very closely this week. Of course, that is the question of the president's effort to end the war in Ukraine through a settlement between Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and his Russian counterpart. You have met Vladimir Putin before. Do you believe that President Trump is perhaps putting too much trust in the Russian leader and his willingness to end the war?
Well, first, I have met Vladimir Putin. And it's clear to me that Putin doesn't want peace. Putin wants Ukraine. And I commend President Trump for continuing to pursue peace in Ukraine today. He is, quite frankly, surrounded by a lot of isolationist voices in and outside the administration that, frankly, would have cut Ukraine off a long time ago. And so I'm grateful the president has stayed after it. I'm grateful that he renewed military support. And I commend him for meeting with President Putin and meeting with President Zelensky and our European allies. But, Michael, I think one thing is missing, and that is I believe the time has come for the United States Senate to enact those strong secondary sanctions against Russia and send them to the president's desk. I believe that would strengthen the president's hand. With a waiver authority that are built into those sanctions, the president could implement them or not implement as he saw fit. But my deep conviction, having studied Vladimir Putin and having spoken to him and told him things he didn't want to hear, is Putin's not going to stop until he's stopped. So while the president continues on one hand on a vigorous track of diplomacy, I think the time has come for the U.S. Senate to put on the president's desk those strong secondary sanctions that will make it clear to Vladimir Putin and to the Russians that unless they choose the pathway of peace through diplomacy, we will continue to provide military support and we will pass the kind of secondary sanctions that will literally break their economy.
What about so-called secondary tariffs against China? Would you be in favor of the administration moving towards that against Beijing like we've seen them take against India, even if some of the argument has been that they haven't done that yet because they don't want to risk the trade talks that are happening right now with China?
Well, I have to tell you that the secondary sanctions against China and other countries that are essentially fueling the Russian war machine, sanctions at 500% would have a devastating effect on the Russian economy. Now, I have plenty of reasons to support strong tariffs against China. During our administration, we changed the national consensus on China. We imposed $250 billion in tariffs, and we brought China to the negotiating table for that phase one trade deal in 2020. So I think we have to be really strong on China after years of trade abuses. But otherwise, I believe we ought to be pursuing free trade with free nations. We ought not to be cheering on $150 billion in tariff revenue that's ultimately paid by American consumers and American businesses, but rather we ought to be looking to lower tariffs with free nations around the world even while we stand firm with places like China.
We do want to get to trade, but I have one other for you when it comes to Russia, because a large part of the discussion this week has been around security guarantees. But we've had reporting here at Bloomberg News that there are doubts growing about what those guarantees can look like, because Russia wants to have a say in what those guarantees are going to be. What is feasible in your view? What can the U.S. push for here when it comes to guaranteeing Ukraine's future, particularly when we know that this will likely be led first by Europe, but then with the United States backing?
Well, the president's taken NATO membership off the table, which he's entitled to do. But I don't know why the United States has given the Russians veto authority over who joins NATO. That's our security alliance. But be that as it may, I think the security commitments that we should make should reflect NATO. They should be, in a sense, like Article 5, where the United States provides whatever's appropriate, not boots on the ground, but the kind of strategic support that's necessary to ensure that once Vladimir Putin is stopped, that he doesn't go forward at all. And if I can come back, the reason I'm so confident and so adamant about the Senate needing to move these secondary sanctions is because it was back in 2019 that President Erdogan sent the tanks across the border into Syria. They were raging down on top of our Kurdish allies. And President Trump put me on a plane on Air Force Two and sent me to Turkey to negotiate a ceasefire. And what I would tell you and your viewers is, in that negotiation with President Erdogan, what was persuasive to him was the fact that President Trump had given me a series of sanctions that would be imposed on members of Erdogan's government unless he agreed to a ceasefire to allow us to evacuate our allies from the border region. As you remember, we secured that ceasefire. Our Kurdish allies were able to evacuate safely. And that's why I really do believe that it would strengthen President Trump's hand if, when the Senate comes back, one of their first acts would be to send those secondary sanctions, that tough bill, to the president's desk, let him sign it, implement it at his choosing with the waiver authority. But I really do believe that at the end of the day, we've got to have that hand reached out in diplomacy and negotiations, but the other hand reminding Vladimir Putin and the Russians that there will be severe consequences, as the president said there would be, if the path of diplomacy fails.
Mr. Vice President, we wanted to move on to domestic politics and those questions, and that includes redistricting. It's been a big topic this week, of course, with what's happening in Texas and California. As a former Indiana governor, would you support that happening in the Hoosier state? And what will be the long-term implications of this wave to redraw congressional maps?
Well, Michael, as a former Indiana governor, I'll support what the current Indiana governor decides is appropriate with our General Assembly. You know, the Constitution gives the states the authority to set the time, place, and manner of elections, and I respect that. I also understand the frustration that the president and many Republicans have felt. I mean, there were states the president and I, the two times we ran together, won 35, 40% of the vote, and yet the congressional delegation from that state is more like 20% or less. Some states where we enjoyed 35% support, there are no Republicans in Congress. You know, there's an old saying that what you sow, you reap, and the heavy-handedness of many Democrat legislatures and governors over the years has set into motion this pathway. So I'm going to let people in Indiana and other legislatures make those decisions. But at the end of the day, it'll be the American people that decide.
Well, no matter what happens when it comes to 2026, 2028, we know the economy is going to remain a top issue for American voters. And this week, U.S. soybean farmers said that they were near a, quote, trade and financial precipice and cannot survive a prolonged trade war, particularly when it comes to China. I've learned that Indiana is a top 5 soybean producing state. Are you concerned about farmers, and do you think that this administration is planning enough ahead to protect U.S. farmers?
I always believe that trade means jobs. And in our administration, whether it was in negotiations with Canada and Mexico or in that the strong stand we took with China imposing tariffs. It was always about lowering trade barriers and ending subsidies and ending trade abuses. Well, my concern about, and I think it's a concern of many farmers in Indiana and all across the heartland, is that what's emerging from this administration are broad-based unilateral tariffs that are being imposed on friend and foe alike. And that's not leverage, that's industrial policy. And I believe, that history shows, and even somebody that knows a little bit about economics knows that American companies and American consumers pay American tariffs. I mean, some of countries around the world that export to us will take a small reduction of their price, but in the main, Americans pay that cost, and it's particularly meaningful for farmers who understand that when there's tariffs that are imposed on imported agricultural goods here, they also always result in retaliation by those markets around the world. So, again, my belief has always been that free trade with free nations. Let's stand strong on trade abusers like China around the world, but let's look to lower tariffs, lower non-tariff barriers, and that way we'll win in the city and on the farm.
Mr. Vice President, you brought up industrial policy, and we wanted to ask you about some headlines that we have seen and broken here at Bloomberg News about some industrial policy moves. This includes the possibility that the U.S. government may take a stake of up to 10% in Intel Corp, the iconic American chip maker, as well as take a 15% cut of sales of NVIDIA AI chips to China. Were those kinds of ideas on the table during your time in the first administration? And do you think these things are a good idea or a good strategy?
This was not a strategy that we employed during the Trump-Pence years. And I have great concerns about having the U.S. government take a position with the golden chairs in Nippon Steel or just the latest discussions about taking 1% of Intel. Now, the NVIDIA agreement is even more problematic. I mean, we have export controls in place to protect our national security. The limitations on the ability of NVIDIA to sell to chips to China was on the basis of our national security. Simply taking 15% of those sales doesn't serve our national interests or our national security, I would argue. And so I think we need to take a step back on all of this. I'd encourage the administration. And if I was speaking to the president, I'd encourage him to, it's time for us to think twice. State-owned enterprise is not the American way. Free enterprise is the American way. And a refereed private sector with less taxes and less regulation has created the most prosperous economy in the history of the world. And if we stay on that path, that'll always be true.
Mr. Vice President, the last minute that we have with you, we do want to ask you about news of day. I would love your thoughts about President Trump's decision to call in the National Guard to Washington, D.C. Do you think that this was the right move?
I strongly support the president's decision to use his authority under the Constitution, and even consistent with the Home Rule Act, to really bring safety back to the streets of Washington, D.C. I know there's a lot of debate about statistics, but, honestly, if Washington, D.C. was a state, it'd have the highest homicide rate in the country. I mean, 1,600 violent crimes this year alone in a city this size is just astounding. And I think the residents of this city and people around the country appreciate the president taking the steps that he's taken to create safety on the streets of our nation's capital. And I fully support efforts by the president to provide resources for states and local communities to make every city and every town in America safe.
Former Vice President Mike Pence, thank you. We'll be right back. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Michael Shepard. Joining us now with their reaction to our conversation with former Vice President Mike Pence and more is this evening's political panel, Lester Munson, Principal of International Practice at BGR Group and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Janae Wartell, a partner at ARC Initiatives. Thank you both for joining us. Janae, I wanted to start with you and get your impressions of what the vice president had to say, in particular on the redistricting question, because it has been such a hot topic for Republicans, but now even more so for Democrats.
Well, I think what's important to understand about this fight is that this is not a fight that we thought we would be in, right, in August of 2025. This is a 10-year redistricting cycle, and so we're all really caught by surprise, especially Democrats, with the fight that we're having right now with the Texas State House. I think what's important to look at here is why are Republicans bucking the law, bucking tradition and precedent to engage in this battle? Why? Because President Trump said, hey, find me 5 seats in Texas. I think that if this is not handled properly by the Texas legislature, this is going to be a guidebook for other states to try the very same thing.
Lester, what do you make of this? Is this the right move by Republicans here if they're trying to gain some sort of advantage when there is such a narrow majority, we know, going into 2026?
Who said, hey, politics, it ain't beanbag? You know, this is hardball politics. Chris Matthews somewhere is very proud of the Republicans for fighting like hell. It's all fair game. I don't think it's against the law. It may be unprecedented. That's true to do it kind of mid-decade here. But this is a political power play. Both parties do it. It was a little ironic for me as a former Chicagoan to see the Texas Democrats go to Illinois to try to make a point about the evils of gerrymandering. Illinois is the most gerrymandered state in the country. It is a work of art by Democrats to exclude Republicans from the House of Representatives. So for political theater, that was pretty good for me.
And back to you, Janae. When it comes to the redistricting question, though, are we hitting a slippery slope? Will this become a race to the bottom then, and it ultimately becomes something that turns off voters even more already, if you can imagine that?
This is about having a level playing field in elections. This is about representatives not choosing their voters and instead voters choosing their representatives. And when you have a fight like what's happening in Texas, what this says to other states is you too can power grab and choose your voters and not have your voters choose you. And so yes, I agree, it's a slippery slope. And I think that what Democrats are doing in fighting back here is important because they are fighting on behalf of the voters so that the voters have a voice in choosing their elected representatives.
And Lester, I do want to continue the conversation here when we were discussing with Vice President Mike Pence and shift focus just a little bit, because we did talk to him pretty extensively there about the impact of tariffs. And we got some new tariff news today, actually, including that the U.S. and the EU made at least one step closer to a deal. They put pen on paper when it came to getting down some of the logistics. But one of the headlines on our terminal is that the vice president said tariffs are ultimately paid for by Americans. Do you think this White House is doing a good enough job when it comes to messaging what is really the centerpiece of their economic plan?
Well, I think you're highlighting the one issue where there's a real difference between former Vice President Pence and the current administration, which is on trade issues. He's very much a traditional Republican, as frankly I am. He wants to see free trade. That's a good thing for America in the long run. It's what builds up our industries. The current administration doesn't see it that way. They want to use tariffs as a way to kind of manage all of these bilateral relationships. It hasn't been quite as damaging to the economy as a lot of us thought, frankly. And I think there's been some modest gains in the diplomatic arena by using tariffs to get things the U.S. wants. But in the grand scheme of things, undermining free trade is not a good thing. I agree with the former vice president, and I think it's just a difference with the current administration.
Janae, on the trade and economy question, is this shaping into something that Democrats can piece together heading into 2026?
Well, I think what this dynamic is laying out is really using the economy as a political football, and that's what the Trump administration is doing. American consumers are going to bear the brunt of these tariffs at a time when Republicans really can't afford for their policies to be more unpopular. We look at this big, ugly bill that the Republicans have passed and are standing behind. This is unpopular messaging for them. And so when I think you look at what Democrats should really be doing in the offense here is pointing to how this is going to impact American consumers. Tariffs don't work. A lot of these deals that they've tried to ink using these tariffs haven't really come to fruition yet. So we haven't even seen the full brunt of the impact of these tariffs.
Of course, tariffs have really dominated the conversation when we're talking about the future path of monetary policy and the Federal Reserve. And we've been covering it all day here on Bloomberg about this White House's pressure campaign now extending to Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Lester, what do you make of perhaps the needle that the administration is trying to thread here? Is it even that when it comes to ramping up this criticism of the Fed? Because we asked the vice president about it, and he sort of walked the line there, since he's previously said the president has his own right to talk about his opinions when it comes to the Fed.
Yeah, I think the president does have a right to talk about the Fed, but the Fed should be independent. I think it's very creative. I'm trying to be positive here. It's very creative of the administration to use federal housing regulators to target political opponents, or at least people who disagree with them on economic policy, with some of these charges, which seem, and I agree with the vice president, she should come forward and defend herself, explain what's happened. She certainly has that right. It's a little concerning to me that we seem to be weaponizing so many organs of government for political purposes, but frankly, I put as much blame on the previous administration for that as I do on this one.
Janae, how would you respond to that point on the prior administration weaponizing government in that way? And specifically, do you see the Fed's independence at stake here in this fight?
I agree that the Fed being independent is incredibly important. We can't create this partisan football that we're throwing around with the relationship with the Fed. I think what's important here is to recognize, and when we look back at the previous administration, I don't recall at all former President Biden having such an adversarial relationship with the chair. And so I think for all of the recriminations of how he dealt with this situation, I think Donald Trump has a more marked adversarial relationship with the Fed. And I think that tension creates really instability in how we think about the role of the Federal Reserve, and that it should, in fact, be independent.
Very quickly, Lester, just to get your thoughts on some breaking news as we're watching to see President Trump make his way to stand with the troops that have been deployed here in the district. We heard former Vice President Mike Pence say that he supported this decision. Where do Republicans fall on the messaging to this? Because there has been some pretty big blowback.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to where the vice president is. I think it is a good move, generally speaking, for the administration to bolster law enforcement in the district. When I was a young person, I left the district because crime became very close to me and I had to move to the suburbs. I didn't want to. I was kind of forced to by the circumstances. This seems very reminiscent of that to me. I think they can do it in a way that isn't so provocative and in the face of people who disagree with them, and do it in a way where more people will support this initiative, because you really do have to have the support of the people who actually live in the district to do this the right way.
All right, and you do see on your screen there for our radio listeners, troops in Washington, D.C. waiting for President Trump's arrival later tonight. We're going to have to leave it there with our panel, but this was such a great conversation. Lester Munson and Jonae Wartell, thank you both so much for joining us here today. Now, the uncertainty around tariffs continues to impact the markets today as we lead up to Jackson Hole. And we heard earlier today how analysts reacted to all of this movement on Bloomberg surveillance.
You can't go up every day. And we've got a great catalyst for bears, skeptics, and nervous investors to take profits without FOMO right now, or fear of missing out. With that kind of uncertainty, what happens is you get some turbulence in the market.
The retailers surprised to the upside. And so the real question is, when will the tariff effects take place and be found in those numbers?
We see this as the beginning of a process that has been very, very slow and continues in the months ahead. The softening of the labor market, the softening of the economy.
The market sentiment for the second half of the year, we think, is already pretty bearish. So if you look at forecasts for growth, for inflation, there's sort of a stagflationary bias.
This is a stagflationary environment. You're going to have some demand destruction, but a big chunk is going to be supply.
Now, for a closer look, we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Vonnie, it's good to see you. It's a big day tomorrow. How are markets positioning ahead of Fed Chair Jerome Powell's highly anticipated speech at Jackson Hole.
Well, for sure, Tyler, you heard many of our investors that have been on all day, really just talking about all of the caveats that are out there, all of the fragilities that might be in this market. And you did see stocks off today. So the S&P 500, for example, was down 0.4%. You had the Nasdaq 100 down about 0.5%. Tech stocks bearing the brunt, and it's been really a week-long slide. So definitely investors have been taking risk off the table. Sure, thinner liquidity at the end of August, but Jackson Hole does have something to do with it as well. Take a look at the tech stocks as well. You had Nvidia down about 0.25%, even as analysts have been upping their price targets before next Wednesday's earnings report. You obviously had Palantir, which was down for most of the session, did finish the session in the green. Also had Intel down 0.2% and Tesla down 1.2%. So the tech stocks have been bearing the brunt of it. If you look at year to date, for example, though, the S&P 500 is still up 8.3%. So ask any of those investors that you heard talking there, and they'd be very happy with that kind of return in any given year, right? The question is, what happens from here? Does the rally stall out, or do things get worse? And investors are definitely hoping for some signal tomorrow. So, for example, the Jackson Hole Symposium, which is run every year by the Kansas City Fed, usually has a theme. This year, the focus is on structural changes in the labor market. But the Fed chair does give a speech at 10 a.m. You'll be able to watch it live on Bloomberg. We're doing a special around it. And in that speech, investors are looking to see, will the Fed chair talk more about the labor market? Will he talk about inflation? Will he skew hawkish? It appears that investors have been taking some bets off the table for a September rate cut. Now, to be sure, 2/3 of investors, about 65% money market-wise, pricing in a 25 basis point come September 17th. Will the Fed chair go there? Will he say anything that will give this market any kind of a signal about what the Fed is thinking in terms of tariffs and their impact on inflation, about the fragility in the labor market? And that's part of the problem. The data are signaling several cross currents. You even saw it today in Walmart, for example. So that stock was down 4.5% today at missed profit estimates. Though things were quite healthy at Walmart because, as we know, even the high-end buyer has been trading down. But I want to point to something that the CEO, Doug McMillan, said. He said that they have actually been raising rates just a very little bit every single week, prices on their goods, passing them on to consumers because of the tariffs. And he literally said that that's going to keep happening every week until the end of the year. So that's just another signal for the Fed chair to parse.
Bloomberg's Vonnie. Quinn, thank you. As markets brace for the full impact of tariffs, businesses are being forced to consider whether to absorb the costs or pass price hikes on to their consumers. That includes the iconic Arizona iced tea 99-cent can, a price the company says is becoming harder to maintain. Joining us now on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio is Don Vultaggio, co-founder and chairman of Arizona Beverage Company. Don, thanks so much for being with us. Don, I guess that is really the question. How long can you hold out on keeping that price level?
We're going to keep trying to hold it, and we've been doing it for 30 plus years, and we don't want to get sidetracked by this recent tariff effect. And we're hoping that the tariff effect will settle down and the people who are taking advantage of the tariff situation get backed off by some government officials. And the people who are involved in the supplying of aluminum are pushing along a tariff on aluminum, even though most of the aluminum is recycled in America. So I think that's unfair, and I don't think that's what the administration wanted.
Don, can you just give us a little bit more insight? Any numbers that you can put on when it comes to the cost that you are absorbing so that it doesn't get passed on to the consumer?
Well, you know, the Midwest Premium, which is the was put in place in the 80s to cover the cost of freight from the coast into the middle of the country, used to be a nickel to 8 cents a pound. Now it's close to 70 cents a pound. A lot of that is due to the tariff effect, even though a lot of the aluminum is collected from recyclers in America and used in a lot of aluminum products. The good news about aluminum, it's recycled over and over again. It could be done thousands of times. An average can could be used and used and used. So the power of aluminum is the fact that it's very recyclable. And the fact is a lot of it's being collected in America due to recycling programs and being reused to make containers. But the effect of the tariff shouldn't be applied to the recycled metal that's collected in America. But in fact, it is. So there's manipulation happening, and hopefully that could be resolved. The other side of it as well is, some of the aluminum is smelted in Canada because a lot of the smelters in America closed up because of the cost of energy versus the cost in Canada. And hopefully some of the things that go on with generating power could be looked at as well. We're reducing the price on plastic because the price in crude has dropped pretty dramatically over the last 6 months. So we're reflecting that cost savings by giving the consumer a lower price on a product that went up a while ago and now it's coming back down. So right now our intention is to hold the price on cans as long as we can. If something, if this kind of thing continues and other effects might happen, like cost of transportation, then we'll have to take another look. But right now we're holding the price.
Don, we've seen a number of other CEOs and business leaders visit the White House, lining up outside to talk to President Donald Trump and his aides about tariffs and trade policy. Have you had any engagement with the administration? And of course, keep in mind that President Donald Trump is known to be fond of soft drinks himself.
Well, I have not had any conversation with anyone, but I'm here and willing to have conversation if they want to be educated about what in fact is going on. A lot of things that are unintentionally happening. I think I think the average American likes the idea of making more things in America and keeping business close to home. But some things just can't happen here in America. Like, we're in the coffee business. They're not growing many coffee beans in Brooklyn or Manhattan, and bananas and mangoes and all the fruits that we use come from countries where they grow. To put a tariff on those kind of things that can never be made here is kind of foolish because it ends up affecting the consumer, and the consumer is going to have to pick up the tab. I don't think the White House wants that. I don't certainly want it as a marketer because I don't think Americans need another price increase on a drink like ours or anything else for that matter.
All right, Don Vultaggio, co-founder and chairman of Arizona Beverage Company, we thank you so much. And we do want to bring you some breaking news here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. President Trump is at the U.S. Park Police and Anacostia Operations Facility. He's addressing police and members of the military about the latest state of Washington, D.C. Let's listen in.
It's never happened before. In 5 months, because really it's a 5-month, even though we're here 7, but we started 5 months ago in terms of investment, and we have, because they see what's happened to our country, we're going to be over 17 trillion with a T, dollars of investment. There's never been anything close. If we did 1 trillion in a year, and we're talking about over a 5-month period, maybe 6 months if you look at it, but over $17 trillion. We're building plants, auto plants, AI plants, all sorts of plants all over the country. I'm giving them the right. Lee Zeldin's done a fantastic job. We're giving them the right to build electric plants. They become almost like a public utility because we have old grids. We have a lot of stuff that's old. We wouldn't be able to compete with China AI. And now we're totally leading the AI race and the artificial intelligence. It's a big deal. And it's the hottest thing there is for probably in 35, 40 years. It's a lot of people don't know what it is. Just trust me, it's very hot. It's big. But they need massive amounts of electricity. They need more electricity than we have right now in the whole country servicing everything. In other words, we have to at least double it up to be competitive and to be leading. And we're more than doubling it up. And what I'm doing is I'm letting all of these very rich companies, and they've got nothing but they got a lot of money, and they want to invest it in the United States. And they're building big plants, but they're building electric plants with it. I said, you build your building, and these are buildings that cost $30, $40, $50 billion when you include everything that's inside, all the technology. I said, I'm going to let you build electric plants to fire your own electricity, and anything that you have left over, you sell it back into the grid. So all of these big factories that are being built are building their own electric plants fired by oil and gas. They're not fired by wind, by the way, because wind doesn't work, but we won't say that. It destroys everything. It looks terrible. It's a very expensive form of energy. And we're not doing wind. We're going back to fossil fuel. I hope not too many of you people are going to be upset, but we have to go back to what works. We can't be foolish. But we're building massive electric plants all over the country. Then they sell it back into the grid. But we're building numbers that nobody's ever seen. We're auto plants. We have many auto plants going up, whereas during the last 4 years. As you know, we had like none. People weren't investing here. So where they weren't investing and they were leaving. But I just finished by saying this. So I was with the King of Saudi Arabia. I was with all of the NATO leaders a couple of weeks ago. And they are putting up not 2%, but 5%. They said 5% of GDP. That's a lot of money. They'll have trillions of dollars put up. They were putting up 2, but they weren't paying it. Now they're putting up 5, and they're all paying it. And they all said the same thing. They said, 1 year ago, your country was dead. We never thought it was coming back. And now you have the hottest country anywhere in the world. These are the leaders of other countries, the prime ministers and the presidents, every one of them said essentially the same thing, said we had a dead country, and we were. We felt that way, and we were. And this place was emblematic of it with the crime, the horrible crime. And, you know, I watch these phony reports. Oh, we were on the way back. They weren't on the way back. It was worse than ever just a short while ago. But now it's going to be, I think now, right now, it's better than it has been in years. And in a couple of weeks, it's going to be even far better than that. And everybody's safe now. Everybody feels safe. And they're all coming in. And people are now coming in. They're making reservations to come in, and they want to be in Washington, D.C. One of the things we're going to be redoing is your parks. I'm very good at grass because I have a lot of golf courses all over the place. I know more about grass than any human being, I think, anywhere in the world. And we're going to be regrassing all of your parks, all brand new sprinkler systems, the best that you can buy, just like Augusta. It'll look like Augusta. It'll look like, more importantly, Trump National Golf Club. That's even better. But we're going to have all brand new, beautiful grass. You know, like everything else, grass has a life. Do you know that? Grass has a life. You know, we have a life and grass has a life. And the grass here died about 40 years ago. So we're going to be rebuilding all of your parks, and it's going to happen fast. It's going to go up like a miracle. So you do the job on safety, and I'll get this place fixed up physically. And we're going to be so proud of it at the end of 6 months. But let's say at the end of a year, this place will be maxed out in terms of beauty. You'll have all new surfaces. You'll have all new medians. Everything's going to look beautiful. A lot of your signs are going to be taken down. They've been up for 40 years. They look like hell. They're barely standing up. They're falling off their holders. And we're going to have all new everything. And I want to just thank Doug for doing such an incredible job. You've been unbelievable. You're a popular guy. No, he's an amazing guy. He's an amazing guy. Everybody loves him. We love you. And his wife is so incredible. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to President Trump address members of the military and police at the U.S. Park Police Anacostia Operations Facility here in Washington, D.C. after he deployed the National Guard here in the district. He touched on his efforts to try to address crime, even amid some criticism about how he's been going about it, though we did just speak to Vice President Mike Pence, who gave his full support of what the president is doing. Now, Michael Shepard, it was pretty interesting to hear, though, President Trump expanded beyond crime. He actually touched on something that we focus a lot on here at Bloomberg, which is investment. Some headlines crossing the terminal for you. President Trump saying that we're leading the artificial intelligence race and that we have to increase electricity capacity to lead AI, a conversation that we had just here yesterday on Balance of Power.
Well, that's right, Tyler. We really heard a wide range of things from the president in terms of his appearance just now. It's not just public safety. He used this moment to talk about investments in AI, data centers, trying to draw companies here to the U.S. to build plants and touting this effort. He doesn't miss a moment or an opportunity to lean into that when we see him either at the White House speaking or out in public. It's really something that has become part of his shtick, for lack of a better word. And, even if it may be a little bit out of context, it's very much of a theme for the president as he's out there. But, of course, he did close in his remarks on public safety.
Right. Of course. And as I mentioned, we did speak to former Vice President Mike Pence about all of this, and we wanted to bring up another topic. Here's what he had to say on whether or not President Trump's pressure campaign to raise allegations against Fed Governor Lisa Cook threatens the independence of the central bank.
What I hope is that the effort to push out another member of the Federal Reserve isn't just simply part and parcel of an effort to get Jerome Powell, who our administration appointed, as Federal Reserve Chair, to to lower interest rates or otherwise take action that that would not otherwise be justified. I understand the president's frustration with Chairman Powell, and he's entitled to speak out about that. But my hope is that these latest allegations are not simply part of that overall pressure campaign.
These comments as monetary policy leaders descend on Jackson Hole, Wyoming for the Kansas City Fed's annual Economic Policy Symposium. And that's where we find our Bloomberg's Michael McKee, who's joined by a special guest, Austan Goolsbee, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Hey, Mike.
Thank you very much, Tyler, and we welcome you, Austan. Thanks for stopping by here. Yeah. We're talking about interest rates there, the Vice President. What's going to happen September 17th?
Well, it depends. For sure, it feels to me like it's a live meeting. As you know, before April 2nd, before we got some uncertainties coming on the policy side, I believed that we had pretty stable full employment, that inflation's coming down to target, the economy's looking relatively solid, and that it made sense for rates to come down a fair bit more from where they are right now. In the interim, we've had mixed messages. We've had some inflation reports that came in milder than we expected, and I was feeling good because I thought if the tariffs kind of stay in their lane and imported goods are only 11% of the economy, there is a real sense in which maybe we never left the golden path. We threw a bunch of dirt in the air, as I described, so you couldn't see the road there for a bit. But maybe we're still on it and it'll be fine. The last inflation report that came in where you saw services inflation, which is probably not driven by the tariffs, really start shooting up, is a danger. That's a dangerous data point. I'm hoping that that's a bit of a blip. So I think we still have a fair bit of information that we're going to get before September or the whole fall to determine what path we're going to be on.
Well, a live meeting implies that you could perhaps cut interest rates. Are you leaning in that direction?
Look, as you know, I don't like tying our hands ahead of time.
But I
want to get all this information. It's particularly important given that we've been getting some mixed signals. And I want to hear what my colleagues have to say going into September or November, December, going into next year. The most important thing is to figure out the through line. And the through line is either we're still on path to get rates down a fair amount. You know, let's say the SEP dot plot where they ask all the members of the FOMC, where do you think rates will settle eventually? That's 100 basis points plus below where we are now at the median. And what will determine whether we can get back on that path of rates coming down is going to be, do we think inflation is under control? We've been 4.5 years above the inflation target. I thought, and we made a lot of progress, and I thought coming into this year, we were in a decent spot that you could make the case we're headed back to 2%. I'm still hopeful that that's true, but I'm a little, as I say, in the last report, there are a couple of little warning signs, and how we are going to react to a stagflationary direction shock. That is something that is driving down employment and up prices at the same time. That's always a very difficult spot for the central bank.
Well, I think Tyler and Mike have a question for you.
Thanks, Mike. Mr. Goolsbee, it's Tyler Kendall here in Washington, and I want to ask you about questions surrounding the Fed's independence. We just had FHFA Director Bill Pulte on Bloomberg Television today. He said he's not going to let up on his campaign when it comes to allegations of mortgage fraud, including against Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Do you support Cook's decision not to resign? And do you think that this pressure campaign from the White House has hurt the Fed's credibility?
Look, I run the Chicago Fed. We're a regional bank. I'm not going to get in the middle of Twitter kerfuffles or whatever's happening. I know that long before I was ever at the Fed, I was an economist, and economists are pretty close to unanimous that having a central bank that is independent of political interference is critically important to the operation of the central bank. And the reason that they're unanimous about that topic is because if you just look at places where that's not true, where the government can order the central bank to cut interest rates, inflation is higher, growth is slower, unemployment is worse, and if we don't have an independent central bank, inflation's coming back. So I think it's absolutely critical that we maintain independence from political interference.
President Goolsbee, I wanted to come back to the broader question of the economy and inflation, too, because earlier this month we saw tariffs start to actually take effect and be enforced, and we may have more coming still on drugs and semiconductors. Where do you see this impact playing out across the economy, and how soon do you expect to see businesses start to pass these costs along to consumers?
That's kind of the critical two questions about tariffs are how much are they going to drive up prices and how long is that price increase going to last? So there is an argument that in pure theory, if it was a one and done tariff, that'd be a one-time increase in the price level, and then as an inflationary impetus, it would be transitory. But as soon as you use the word transitory, you want to be a little careful. That's only for a one and done tariff. And this hasn't been one, and it doesn't seem like it's close to done. So we can get on a cycle that is inflationary. And if the tariffs are applying to intermediate goods, that is parts, components, supplies, things like primary metals, semiconductors, things that go into the cost of production for U.S. manufacturing, that is one way that tariffs jump out of their 11% of GDP lane and start making me more nervous, because now it ceases to just be an increase in the prices of the tariff-affected goods. Now those tariffs are raising prices in the goods, the industries that are using the tariff-affected goods. And we saw in COVID, the bigger that is, the more it's affecting the supply chain and disrupting it, the longer and more persistent that can last. So those are kind of the questions floating around that we're grappling with.
Austan, I want to go back to the White House versus Fed situation for a moment. The administration has alleged mortgage fraud against three people: Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, Democratic Attorney General of New York, Letitia, and then now Lisa Cook. You were the chairman of the Economic Advisors Council to President Obama. You're a Democrat. Are you worried that they might come after you?
I didn't know where you were going with that. As I say, I'm here, member of the FOMC. The law is quite clear of what should determine interest rates. It's the FOMC, and we're supposed to be looking at stabilizing prices and maximizing employment. You become a sworn member of the Federal Reserve, you're out of the politics business. You're out of the elections business. So I'm trying not to get distracted from the basic thread of we must figure out where we are on those dual mandate grounds when setting the interest rates. And that is what we should be basing the interest rate decisions on. It shouldn't be about power politics. It shouldn't be about what somebody said about somebody else on Twitter. We go into that room and we take the job very seriously.
Well, Austan Goolsbee, thank you very much for joining us, the president of the Chicago Federal Reserve. We'll send it back to Mike and Tyler.
Bloomberg's Mike McKee and Chicago Fed President Austan Goolsbee, thank you both.
To learn more about everything you've heard tonight, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. Thanks so much for joining us here on Balance of Power. We'll be back tomorrow alongside Michael Shepard. I'm Tyler Kendall. Keep it here. This is Bloomberg.